So I'm no stranger to cargo bikes. Back in the early aughts, I used to be a portrait photographer in Long Beach, and I did all my photo shoots by bike. I'd regularly carry 50 pounds of gear, 20 to 50 miles a day. And back then, a front loading cargo bike in the US was a rare thing. Fast forward 15 years later, and the landscape has completely changed. Cargo bikes are a little bit more common and they don't have to be bespoke. Today, we're going to be taking a look at one of the most popular front loading options that has been recently been making waves, and that is the Omnium MiniMax. Welcome back, Pathless Peddlers. And if you're new to the channel, we're all about the non competitive side of cycling, aka riding party pace. And if you're into that, please consider supporting the channel by joining us on Patreon or hitting that subscribe button. The Omnium MiniMax slots in between three cargo bikes within the Omnium range. First off, can we appreciate how that is even an option now? 15 years ago, that would have been just mind-blowing that there'd be a range within cargo bike. There is the OG Cargo, which is the longest model and probably closest to my old cargo bike in terms of length and carrying capacity. And there's also the Mini, which is absolutely adorable and charming. Reminds me of a more beefy and intentional version of the Crust Clydesdale fork. So Omnium sent the bike to my beautiful parking, a bike shop in Barcelona, who also is an Omnium dealer, by the way, and they built it up for review. The bike is in their blurple color, which is like a bluish purple, which, to be honest, why would you get any other color but this one? It's sometimes blue, sometimes purple, depending on the light, but it's always rad and it's an absolute like head turner. For a build kit, you have a couple of options. You can go with SRAM Apex, a belt drive. This one is clearly the Shimano option. It's set up 1x with a 42 chainring in the front and 11 to 40 in the rear. The brakes on this bike, unlike my old bike, are hydraulic, which is completely fine. Hydraulic disc brakes on the cargo bike make absolute sense. The controls are mounted to Omnium's own Wonder Bar, which is actually a really delightful design. It's fairly wide and it has a nice 27-degree sweep as well as a little bit of rise. I really dig this bar and love that it exists. Right now, it seems like it's probably the closest thing to an alt bar that is readily available in the EU. The alt bar trend has not made it to Spain, so it's cool to see that this is an option that you can get with the bike clearly, but you can also order by itself. The tires are some big and juicy Big Bends that roll pretty quickly on city streets and are nice and cushioned. They're 55 millimeters wide and have a high center ridge, so absolutely perfect for city streets. This particular build also has a lever actuated dropper post, which you guys know I love. It's great if you want to get rad or if you want to share this bike with someone with a slightly different saddle height than you. The weight for a complete medium build is about 19 kilograms or 40 pounds as per Omnium. I don't have a scale where I could actually weigh this, but definitely feels north of 30 and around that 40-pound mark. Looking at the rest of the frame before we get to the cargo part, there's eyelets in the rear for rear rack and fenders, as well as eyelets on the small little fork so you can put fenders. It actually ships with fenders, which is super nice. The rear also has sliding dropouts if you want to mess around with the geometry. I found myself just leaving it in that forward tuck position. Okay, so let's talk about the front. It has a steering linkage, which is fairly common for this kind of bike. It's similar to what my old cargo bike had. There is some tuning that you can be done, but I left it in its stock position. The platform is actually removable and can be easily bolted or removed from the boom arm. That's actually how we got it back from Barcelona. So we weren't taking a ton of room in the train. We traveled with the platform off. In terms of the platform, there are a variety of options to kit it out. As you can see here, it's got the web strap option. This gives it a fairly lightweight platform. You can go lighter still by opting for the mesh top. Aside from that, there are optional carriers for carrying children. There's even a folding cargo box. There's various bags, all sorts of things you can stick in the various nooks and crannies and really optimize all the carrying capacity on the bike. This particular build came with an extender bar. So depending on the load, you can lengthen it or shorten it. And it came in really clutch recently when I had to pick up a review bike. I had to lengthen it out so I could get both boxes on the bike. So perfect for that. So the way the load is positioned on the bike is that it's a little bit higher than you would see on a long john, like say a Bullet or a Harry versus Larry, where the weight sits a little bit lower. Because of this, it can feel a little bit tippy and top heavy depending on how heavy your load is. The upside, however, is that it's easier to carry longer things like a bike stand or a really long bike box, since the load doesn't interfere with the front wheel. The load's kind of suspended over the front wheel. When you first hop on, especially without a load, the bike can feel a bit squirrely in the front. However, once you get a load on the front, it chills out the steering. And it's kind of similar to my experience with the Brompton, where if you've ever ridden a Brompton, if you don't have the front touring bag or some kind of bag, it can feel a little squirrely. But the second you put the bag on there or just like a little bit of weight, it starts to feel more like a normal bike. I think probably the most unnerving thing is not seeing the front wheel, and you don't realize how much feedback you get from the wheel's position. All that said, it is relatively easy to adapt to. After a few minutes, a handful of rides, your body will naturally figure out how to deal with the weight and not seeing the front wheel. Probably the biggest adaptation was leaving more room in front of you. This makes sense, especially in a urban situation. You just have a longer front end as well when you're carrying a load. You just need more distance to stop. So to secure the cargo, I use a combination of really big cam straps for big bulky loads, as well as some used inner tubes. The inner tube trick actually works really well because when you strap things under it, the tubes have a natural elasticity, so it tends to hold things down. The rubber is also quite grippy, so things don't slide around. You can also adjust the tension by moving the knot on the tube. So in the time I've had it, which has been a couple months, I've used it to move us from one apartment to another apartment, to pick up IKEA packages, to pick up regular life packages, and even to pick up a review bike. Before we go any further, I have to say one unsung hero of the bike is actually the kickstand. It's cast aluminum and it makes it so the bike is easy to load and unload without having to find like a big stretch of wall to lean the bike against. And I can't tell you how helpful this is. And it's awesome that it's included with complete builds and, in my opinion, an absolute necessity. It just made the bike so much more usable. Okay, so how did the bike ride? In general, the bike is surprisingly responsive for something that can carry so much. It does take a little bit of initial effort to get the bike going. It's just a lot of bike to move. That said, once you get it going, however, it's like a freight train and it likes to hold its speed. The bike also manages to feel relatively nimble given its length. I feel like oftentimes a cargo bike without a motor can feel like a chore to ride sometimes. It's just heavy. I mean, it's very useful, but it's heavy. The MiniMax, however, manages to not lose all the snap. It really balances that line between the ability to carry stuff, but still not riding like an absolute, dog when it's unloaded. They managed to keep it still like a fun riding bike. I think if you're looking for a cargo bike that doesn't have a motor, although you can get it with a motor, but don't want something that rides like an absolute boat, then the MiniMax is a great option. I think it's a great cargo bike for most people that are looking for a non-motorized cargo bike. Okay, so what are the downsides of this bike? So first off, for me, the gearing is a bit high. You probably knew I was going to say that. It's been fine using it around town here in Drona, but to take it on a tour or to take it up the mountains around us, I'd definitely swap out the gearing. Some would go the 1x mullet route, but for me, I'd go wide range 2x. This would allow you to get some really low lows that you couldn't achieve with just like a standard 1x mullet. Hopefully this is relatively easy, I think, with the Dior build. It seems to have shipped with the M5100 rear derailleur. And it looks like it's not the 1x specific one, so it can be used in a 2x system, given you swap out the crank and the front derailleur. So I might do that in a future video and get the MiniMax more climb worthy. Second thing to consider is the size of the bike. I initially really struggled to get it into the small Euro style elevators we have here in Spain. Getting it in and out felt like cheating death, basically. I had to be really careful about making sure the wheel didn't get closed on by the elevator door or getting caught when it was opening or closing. Every successful trip up and down the elevator felt like I was cheating death. There is a trick to stand the whole bike on the front wheel, which sort of helped. It's totally doable, but it's not the best daily solution just because the bike tends to be so heavy. And it wasn't until I figured out a way to kind of securely lock it in our garage that it made sense. So that's one thing to consider. Obviously, a no-brainer. Make sure you have space for the bike. And that it's easily accessible. Third downside for me is the kind of tallish level top tube. I sized up to the medium to get the stack height I wanted, and that pretty much eliminated whatever standover there was. Beyond my weird kind of leg height proportions, it makes it difficult to share the bike in a household, especially if you're of varying heights. I think if it had more of a sloping top tube or even a lower place top tube, this would have been able to accommodate more heights per given size. Okay, so as of now in 2024, they're on their third version of their cargo bikes. I hope they keep refining them and adding to the lineup. I'd love to see them add a version with two 20-inch wheels similar to the Petite Porteur for a truly space crunch cargo bike option. They can call it the Micro MiniMax. I'm stoked that this bike exists. I think it makes sense as a cargo bike for more people. For folks that don't need, absolute cargo carrying capacity, but need more than like a Clydesdale 4 could carry. And if you want a cargo bike that's still fun to ride as just like a bike. I'm really stoked on this bike and what Omnium is doing, bringing a fun cargo bike to the masses without the bespoke wait times or prices. And that's something I would have never expected, 15 years ago. I liked it so much that I think we might be adding it to our permanent stable. It's just so dang useful. And that blurple color, it slays. If you guys enjoyed this review and found it helpful or entertaining, please consider supporting the channel by joining us on Patreon. We're viewer supported and unsponsored. And if you appreciate that, you know what to do. As always, everybody, keep the supple side down.